Hello, everyone. Welcome back to session 3 of the Sea Turtle. And in this session, we're going to start the process of what we usually do to get ourselves through the ugly stage. Pretty much all the painting will be covered in the most important places. We'll start adjusting values, making sure values balance in relation to each other, making some small fixes like using lifting techniques to fix some of the things that we want to refine, adding details. And this is actually going to take this full session. And then in the last session, be sure to watch the last session. Not as many people do. I would say about 40% do, but that is when the magic happens. That's when you put on those little details that really make everything magical. It's worth it, and work the process, stay with it until you finish the painting and give it a chance, because most paintings go through ugly stages and you got to work through that. So anyway, I've got my flat here and I'm getting some French ultramarine. I added a little bit of Winsor Violet, it looks like, to get it richer and darker. Getting about milk consistency. All right, so I'm going to get the eye area prepped for receiving paint. And usually for me, what that means is getting it to some level of wetness or dampness. So I'm going to get the eye wet. I'm getting the whole area around the eye wet where the wrinkles are, carefully leaving white paper where the wrinkles are white because they are the top part of the wrinkle. The indentations are the shadowed parts. That's some Winsor green gold. So I'm going to float in my lightest color, and wherever I put the water is where the paint will flow. So if you can't really tell where I put the water, just kind of watch first and you'll see that I put water wherever I wanted the paint to flow and left it dry where I don't want the paint to be, where I leave pure white folds and wrinkles. But this just helps the paint flow and helps it mix and mingle because we're going to put several colors in this eye area. I like to put the most details in my eye area. That's my style. I do make the eye the focal area of interest if there is an eye for an animal painting. Here I'm putting in some Pyrrole Orange. Using my 4 round, you can use a 2 round, 6 round, whatever gives you a good enough point to get these smaller little details, and just take your time, go slow, and really, even more than watch what I do, study the eye and just do what it says, because this eye is really interesting in that it has all these rainbow colors. So here goes in my permanent green light, and I'm floating it right in over on top of that orange and letting them mix together. Just in the corner though, and in the very corner, it's more purple and blue. And I love that rainbow of colors that was in this eye area. So that's how I'm trying to emulate that. All right, getting some purple mix for a few little smaller details here. More purple mix, graying it down with an orange. My Pyrrole Orange. And just putting a few more marks of darks here and there as I see them needed, as my reference photo tells me. Put some tea consistency purple marking there on the head. So when you want your light your marking to be lighter, just mix in more water. So just putting little details of markings. There's lots of markings and texture in this area. So I'm just putting in some gray purple. How do you get gray purple? You take your purple mix and add a little tiny bit of orange to it. And I saw these really light little details in this light area. So very tea consistency gray purple there on the fin. There's some purple mixed in with the textures of these scales on the fin. So I'm just painting on perfectly dry paper and putting a glaze of very tea consistency gray purple over some of these. If you want yours more of a color pop color, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do exactly what the reference tells you to do. More gray purple, milk consistency on dry paper. Putting a few of these little lines in. I could use a rigger, a smaller brush, or if I blotted the heel, I'd get finer lines. For some of these lines that go between the scales, I think that adds a nice little contrasting texture. The lines, the thin little lines do, which we'll put in more of them as we go. I wanted to define this leg some more by putting some of this purple gray, and pretty much exactly the way my reference is telling me to do. You can just kind of make up the shapes of the scales, or you can paint more closely to what the reference tells you to do. That's up to you as an artist, how closely you want this to the reference. But for details like this, you don't have to tell the exact story. You can tell the impression of the story, and it will read as scales either way. All right, so here I'm getting a rigger style script brush. Any rigger will do with milk consistency. I just wanted to get some finer lines, and you can blot out the heel too to make sure you get a nice thin line coming out. So thin little lines on dry paper, just here and there. Don't draw every single line. It will look too stiff if you paint every single little detail. You want to let the viewer's mind fill in something. So just paint the impression. Getting more milk consistency, purple mixed up there. I'm using ultramarine blue, naphthol red, and a little bit of orange added in for my gray purple. I'm back to my 6 round. And I'm just doing what my reference tells me in this area too. The light is hitting this fin, making the markings really stark, super dark scales with super light lines in between them. So I notice I paint up to the white lines between them. So I'm painting carefully so that I make sure I leave all those nice sparkles of white lines in between these scales here. While I'm at it, I darken these as well because they're darker in the reference. To add interest, you could make each of these little scales a slightly different color. Add a little blue to this one, add a little bit of red to that one. So there's slightly different variations of purple. That would make it even more interesting. I was keeping it simple. This tutorial is complex enough. Blotted to make sure that I have control of my water. If you're trying to paint these little scales and you're getting too many blobs and you lose control of your paint, just blot. Remember to blot the heel of your brush, pick up your paint, and then blot the heel of your brush, not the tip. I'm just playing around here, adding a little bit of purple markings to my brown ones, because in the reference there's very warm, dark, bigger brown scales, and then these lighter purple ones kind of in the middle. And then underneath kind of his armpit area, it's super dark. And I think that helps call attention to this negative space of white, that upside down V between his, that's going up into his armpit basically. And here to add some textural variety, I'm taking advantage of the textural variety by painting some of the lines. I could use my nice thin script brush and make them even more refined. I think that would look good. There was a repeating pattern somewhat of equally sized scales going around this curve that I thought would be nice to emphasize a little bit because there is so much chaos in this painting. So that was my thinking with those scales there on the curve of his fin. Again, all this is on dry. Just study your reference and look at the details and see which ones you want to emphasize and which ones you think are important to help tell the story of this fin. I was giving this fin a lot of attention because I feel like it's an important compositional element. It's curving around, helping the viewer's eye go back up into the turtle. So I've spent a good amount of time just playing with it, giving it attention. Getting these edges really a varied edge. There's no straight lines in the reference on the edges of this fin here. So I wanted to play that up to add interest and texture. All right, more milk consistency gray purple going in here. There's a few dark areas in the shell. So I'm just going to loosely mimic what I see. Using a bit of dry brush, picking up some tea consistency, gray purple, blotting my brush, and then using the edges of my brush to kind of scrumble on with the side of my brush some of this lighter texture in the shell. The light is hitting this area though, so make sure it's tea consistency. You want them light because this area is very light and we want to keep it that way. Just doing a little bit of dry brush with the tea consistency and using the side of my brush in a fast, sweepy, swishy motion to get a bit of a textured look with this tea consistency, very watery, purple gray. More purple gray mix here. Blotting my brush so I get more of a nubbly, textured look. You're silly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You're saying thank you for me calling you silly? Stop. So funny. Ha 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 ha. Sorry for that interruption, but I just thought I would share my real life experience of getting interrupted while I paint. It happens. So Parker thinks he's so funny, so cute. All right, so I'm using the very tip of my brush here to paint in some of the lines just to add some textural variety again. These lines are very different than the big chunky marks of the scales. So that's something you want to play up maybe to contrast with the big chunks of color that we have in the scales, these delicate, thin little lines. Sorry about Parker, he will go away in a second. I personally think he's adorable. I'm also painting around some of the big circle nubs in the skin, celebrating some of those. Not every single one though, because then it'll start looking stiff and it will not look like dreamy realism anymore. If you paint every single little wrinkle, every single little nub, every single little scale. There's a fine line between detail and dreaminess. And you'll lose it if you paint every single detail. I wanted to play up this negative space, so I'm painting in the turtle, which is the positive space, getting it a little darker in the shell here right next to that upside down V of negative space because I want to play up that area. Getting super dark. When I want a super dark mix, I reach for my ultramarine blue in the mix somehow. So ultramarine blue plus pyrrole orange makes a very nice dark brown that I'm painting here. So I'm deepening some of those wrinkles and then spraying them so they don't get too stiff and like they're placed on top of the turtle. I want them ingrained into the turtle so you can paint on dry paper, and then if it looks too stiff, you can give it a spray or two with a misting sprayer. All right, coming up is a really interesting technique that I kind of discovered. So I've got all this thick, dark paint. I'm letting it set up, unbeknownst to myself. I'm letting it set up all these super thick cream consistencies, super dark markings that I'm making that can get really heavy really fast. So you paint these on, their cream consistency marks on dry paper. They look a little stiff. and you let them half dry, and then you spray them with one little pump of spray. You let that sit for a few shakes, and then you blot, and it makes the coolest texture. And I didn't mean to do that. And it just happened. And this is what I mean by happy accidents. And I'm going to try to recreate that in a simpler tutorial, definitely. But you're about to see me do that. So if you want to try it too, get your spray bottles ready. If you're painting thick cream consistency, paint like I am on dry. Because next we're going to give it a little spritz, like one spritz, just so there's kind of little small blobs of water that when you let them sit, they kind of loosen up the paint, and then you blot, and the blot with the tissue, I use just fine tissue. It will just lift off where you sprayed. Okay, here it goes on my little spritz. Let's see how long I waited before I blotted. So I'm kind of letting it sit, not long. But you know, when you spray like that, that's going to stay wet a long time. And then look, I let it sit maybe 30 seconds, and then I blotted. And then as I blotted, I saw that texture come out, and I was like, ooh, I gotta keep that technique in my back pocket. In the next clip where I paint the eye and I zoom in, you'll be able to see the texture even better. It was really cool. Give me a message and let me know if this worked for you. Love this technique. Definitely going to use it again. Anyway, you see the texture there? In the darker areas where I lifted out. Really cool. All right, so I'm going to do the black part of the eye. So you can use just flat black. The world will keep spinning if you just use black for the eye. I think I'm going to use a mix of ultramarine blue and pyrrole orange for my mix. So I'm just going to pre-wet the eye area. Using, I think, my 4-round smaller brush. And there is a white of the eye in the corner of the turtle's eye that's at the top of the eye. So I would leave that perfectly dry to get that little nice sparkle of white that we like to have near the eye, either in the glisten or in the eyeliner, or in this case, the whites of the eye. And then since the eye is wet, I can just kind of dot in the black and it'll fill in. And I try to keep mine black kind of towards the bottom of the eye and then let it get lighter just to create more interest as it moves up into the top part of the iris pupil. I'm not sure if this is iris and or pupil. But here I'm trying to keep it light by dotting at it with the thirsty brush up here. And while it's still wet, if your eye gets to be all flat black the whole way across, you can go in with the thirsty brush and kind of lift out in the top corner to make it more interesting. See, I'm blotting out with a tiny little corner of tissue there. Then I'll drop maybe in a little bit more milk consistency, or you can push that wet black paint up into the lighter area. Just kind of futz around with it. If you don't like it, you can blot the whole darn thing up. Try again. you make a mistake and go outside the bounds of where you want to paint, just blot it up. It'll actually add some texture, probably make it look even better. So don't be afraid of that. All right, next I'm going to use lifting techniques to bring back lights, soften, smooth, and fix mistakes. I'll use a 1/2-inch acrylic flat painting brush that's softer than a stiff scrubber since I'm working on hot press. If you're working on cold press, you can use a stiffer brush to lift. Wait until your paper is completely dry. Get your brush wet but not drippy. Then rub gently in the area you want to lift out paint. All right, let's listen to live Rachel for the rest of this video.
I'm just kind of gonna play with this, and let's see how much I can lift in this area too. One thing I don't have right is these curves that go across his chest. I have them going straight across the page, but he's tilted, so they need to be more like this, not like this, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna fix that. By lifting, and this is hot press, remember, so you don't use a scrubber for lifting, you just use a somewhat stiff brush, which this is perfect, it's a synthetic flat. So I'm just using clean water and just getting my brush wet. To lift like this, you need to work on perfectly dry paint and have a wet brush. And you get some really nice soft effects that are very believable, very realistic looking. And you can really refine some of the things that you painted nicely. I'm going to add more cools into this chest. Right now it's a lot of warms. So I'm just scrubbing back some lighter areas that I will then go in and put in some more green, I think. And look how realistic this texture looks because of some of the techniques we used. Very exciting. So I'm just agitating my brush to lift. This is one place I think I'll go in with some white pencil, or you can use white gouache. But I want a more austere edge here. So for these markings, this is a really great place to bring back the white around these markings, and it will look so natural. Look how good that looks. When you use really thick cream consistency paint and then go back and scrub it, it scrubs out like a dream. Look how much I'm able to lift because I used cream consistency. Also, the other part of the equation is that I used non-staining paint. So burnt sienna, and the other colors that I use are non-staining, so they lift readily. And see, I'll go back and paint that back once it dries again. But it makes watercolor a more forgiving medium than many people realize, just if you know a couple tricks of how to make it more workable. And that is using non-staining paints, using paper that you can lift on. Stonehenge Aqua Hot Press is the most amenable hot press version for lifting, and Arches Cold Press is the best for scrubbing techniques that I've found. And lifting techniques to me really look realistic. Which I like that, obviously. So I'm lifting back out these light areas. Of markings. For this shell, and it just looks so realistic. So you can spend as much time scrubbing your heart away as you want to really just continue to refine. That's one of the secrets of Mary White and her realism. She scrubs the heck out of her stuff to make it really soft and realistic looking. Somehow the softer sometimes you get something, the more realistic it looks. Okay. Now I want to get a soft brush because I don't want to move these dried layers. So I think I'll use an 8. And I want to put some more cools in all this warm area. So I'm just going to grab I'm going to go back to my permanent green light. Permanent green light and my PB17 for really bright color. Probably leaning more towards blue. If you don't have PB17, just use a turquoise. Antique turquoise would be fine. But I just need some more cools in here. And there's also these shadows. They're very cool over in here. Doesn't really matter what color exactly you use for your cools. It's more important the cool versus warm. And in fact, this is even warmer through here, more yellow. So I'm going to get some more permanent green light mixed with Winsor green gold, I would say. And then more of the turquoise color coming up through here. And then just to give some texture, I'm just gonna do like that, and I'm gonna let that dry and then come back. And I'm a little afraid of all this, so I guess, am I procrastinating? Maybe. All right, I'm gonna let that dry and we'll come back. All right, while this is still half wet, I'm gonna give it another spray to create texture.
All right, thank you so much for joining me for session 3. And in session 4, we will go into the final stage of painting, which is pulling everything together, putting in those last final details. I call them jewelry. You don't want too little jewelry, you don't want too much jewelry, but we need to add those final details to really make this pull together and be a cohesive painting. It's so important to stick with me through the final stage of doing the final fixes and adding the jewelry. And I will see you there. And until next time, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.